That's right. It can be proven without a shadow of a doubt that the United States Central Bank owns no gold whatsoever. So what about all of this gold that we hear about at Fort Knox? Well, I'll explain that as well in this video as we explore. Central banks around the world have been accumulating gold at a record pace. We've not seen central banks hold as much gold as they have for well over 50 years now. It is a massive, massive drive towards gold, which has been large part due to its prices going up so much to all-time record highs being broken again and again. So what about the United States? Well, there's a lot of controversy there. A lot of people don't feel we have any gold whatsoever. But, reasonable people can agree or disagree on that. But one thing we can agree on and can be proven, and I'm going to prove it to you here, is that we do not have any gold at all in the Federal Reserve System. The Federal Reserve is our central bank. So where is the gold and who owns the gold? Well, it is held in the Fort Knox and also in the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. But the Federal Reserve owns none of that gold. So how does this all work out? Well, there is a piece from the Mises Institute that explains exactly what's going on here. The Federal Reserve does not own any gold. Historically, as during the days of the classical gold standard, central banks maintained stocks of gold to facilitate the conversion of gold-backed national currencies. Those days are long gone, but in modern times, many central banks continue to own gold, and many central banks buy gold as part of their open market operations. And the rising purchases of gold by central banks are an essential factor justifying the recent increase in demand for the precious metal. Central banks, especially in China and India, are trying to reduce their dependence on the dollar or the euro to diversify their reserves. And it's not just them. We're seeing other nations step up their game in buying gold, such as a video that I did recently about Iraq, now moving to number 29, up from number 30 in gold holdings. Other nations like Poland and other Eastern and Western nations are accumulating a lot of it as well. It is now the new thing to do, not just because of de-dollarization, but because many nations around the world are abusing their currencies with loose monetary policy. The U.S.'s central bank, the Federal Reserve, is not among those banks buying gold. Obviously, the Fed has no interest in buying up gold as a means of de-dollarization. Moreover, the Fed is presently concerned with purchasing more dollar-denominated government debt to keep interest rates low on the federal government's huge deficits. But we must also note that another reason the Fed isn't buying gold is that the Fed hasn't been in the gold-owning business for a long time. In fact, since 1934. The Fed has owned no gold since then, when the Fed handed over all of its gold in exchange for gold certificates. This is how the Fed Board of Governors summarized the situation there. The Federal Reserve does not own gold. The Gold Reserve Act of 1934 required the Federal Reserve System to transfer ownership of all of its gold to the Department of the Treasury. In exchange, the Secretary of the Treasury issued gold certificates to the Federal Reserve for the amount of gold transferred at the then applicable statutory price for gold held up by the Treasury. Gold certificates are denominated in U.S. dollars. Their value is based off the statutory price of gold at the time of the certificates were issued. Gold certificates do not give the Federal Reserve any right to redeem their certificates for gold. And that seems kind of crazy, doesn't it? But that's the kind of backward systems that we find ourselves in since the institution of the Federal Reserve Act of 1913. Yes, that's kind of the way we are now in this present course in time. The statutory price of gold is set by law. That's right. This is price fixing. It is still going on today for gold. You want to talk about manipulation? Well, now we have this divorce between the market price and the statutory price of gold. Check this out. It does not fluctuate with the market price of gold and has been constant at $42.22, or take that to the ninth power, or ninth decimal place, it's 42.22222, and keep going until you get to the end. That's per fine troy ounce. That was a number set on the books back in 1973, which was up from $38, which was up from $35, which was up from $20.67, which was the number, which is the price that when the Executive Order 6102 was put into place, that all citizens should return all of their gold, save for 5 of these, essentially 5 ounces, $20 gold piece. It's remarkable to see how far we've come and where gold is priced right now with the natural market. And some people feel that gold's price is still suppressed lower than it should be. Although the Federal Reserve does not own any gold, the Federal Bank of New York acts as the custodians of gold owned by account holders such as the U.S. government, foreign governments, other central banks, and official international organizations. No individuals or private sector entities are permitted to store gold in the vault of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York or any Federal Reserve Bank. A small portion of the gold held by the U.S. Treasury, which is about $600 million in book value, about 5% is held in the custody of the Treasury by the Federal Reserve Banks as fiscal agents of the United States. The vast majority of this gold is located in the vault of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, and a very small portion is on display in several Federal Reserve banks, Kansas City being one of them. I think a member of this community told me about seeing one there. The remaining 95% of U.S. Treasury gold, which is $10.4 billion in book value, is held in custody of the Treasury by the United States Mint. And you know where that is, Fort Knox, Kentucky, near Fort Knox Army Base. Now think about that, $10.4 billion, and then $600 million. That's something. Those numbers put together are really just a few drops in the bucket of how much debt we have in this country. Let that sink in for a moment. It's pretty remarkable. Even when you take in the market price of gold, it would not even come close to paying off the U.S. national debt. That gives you some perspective there. But in reality, I think that tells us that gold really is worth a whole lot more than what the market price is, or obviously the fixed price of gold. And because when it's all said and done, you can just digitize or print these ad nauseum to infinity and beyond. But beyond is not that far down the road to where it's going to either collapse or be reset. And the true value of gold very well could reveal itself one day. But we should not bank on that, pun intended, in that regards. All we can do is be our own central bank by holding gold in our possession. Because in the end, gold, no matter how much power the federal government has, or the Treasury has, or any political institution has, gold is gold, and there's only so much of it that can be mined and minted and created each year. It is possible to imagine that the Fed could start buying gold, but I kind of doubt that's going to happen. But it's hard to see why the Fed would be motivated to do so, given that the Fed's gold certificates have essentially no connection to the actual market price of gold. Changes in the price of gold virtually have no effect on the value of the Fed's asset. The only way gold prices would become relevant to the Fed's portfolio would be for the Congress to change the statutory price of gold from $42.2222. If the Fed wanted to actually take possession of that gold, the Congress would also have to authorize the Fed to redeem the certificates in gold. There is a very unlikely, barring a very big change in the ideology of the ruling regime, essentially barring said ideological change, that we suspect that in a true crisis, the Fed's extremely tenuous claim of owning its pre-34 gold stockpile would be null and void altogether. The Treasury finds itself truly strapped for cash. If that occurs, the Congress would only have to declare the Fed's gold certificates permanently unredeemable, or the Treasury could simply buy back the gold certificates at the ridiculously low statutory price. Then there would be no doubt about who owns the gold. The Treasury could then simply sell off the gold to Wall Street banks in exchange for dollars. That would go to luxury hotels for illegal immigrants, or some bombs for the state of Israel, or for Ukraine, or whatever superfluous spending you want to say where those dollars are going to go. But notwithstanding, I don't think we're going to see anything like that. The Federal Reserve and the Treasury are not going to mess with the gold because it's really inconsequential. Unless they actually reset the price of gold from $42.22 to some ridiculous number like, $2,500. Think about it. $2,500 gold just 3 years ago would have seemed pretty crazy. Look where we're at today. Gold at $2,500 or $10,000 or whatever number it is that they choose in order to pay off the debt, which would be likened to essentially hoodwinking the American people, much as the case it was to be if they were to do a $1 trillion platinum coin. There you have it. Let me know what your thoughts are about this analysis and insight, and I hope you found it insightful and educational and inspirational and informative. Gold, it does not change no matter what the government does or who holds it. The Treasury holds the gold, not the Federal Reserve, which is the U.S. Central Bank of the United States of America. Gold. Keep it if you got it. And if you don't have any, well, it may not be a bad time, even with the prices where they're at, to maybe get a little bit of it in your portfolio. Be your own central bank. I'd like to extend a multitude of gratitude to each and every one of you for taking the time to watch this video, and to encourage you to please rate, share, comment, and subscribe.